Kanni Wignaraja is the Regional Director of UNDP Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific. She is also the UN Assistant Secretary General and the UNDP Assistant Administrator. She recently visited Bhutan virtually and met the Prime Minister of Bhutan and the Cabinet Ministers and other senior government officials to discuss development challenges and opportunities in Bhutan. And now we are joined by the Regional Director all the way from New York. Good morning, ma'am. It must be a beautiful morning in New York.
It is, and lovely to see you, and good evening to you, Sonam.
Good evening. And you have met our Prime Minister virtually and the Cabinet Ministers and the government officials on your recent mission to Bhutan. So tell us briefly about the significance of this mission and the outcome of the meetings.
Well, this for me was a very important return visit to Bhutan, although this time, unfortunately, it had to be a virtual one. But it brought back some very special memories, even if I couldn't be there in person, because the spirit and the vision of this country is really carried by the people one meets and talks to, and that remains so strong. For me, the timing was very important. And with COVID-19 that has done so much damage in the world, countries and families have been so deeply affected. So I wanted to recognize and appreciate how much Bhutan has done to address the pandemic and to address climate change at the same time, and to offer UNDP support to even reach higher levels of ambition that the country is setting for itself.
What is your perspective about the partnership between UNDP and Bhutan, and where do you see it heading in near future?
Well, for UNDP, we deeply value this partnership with the Royal Government of Bhutan. This is 50 years of accompanying the country over its many chapters of development. And just last year, when UNDP put out its Human Development Report, it was with such pride we saw that Bhutan had increased its Human Development Index almost by 25% between 2005 and 2019. And that is a significant advancement. Something that few countries can attest to, and it's because life expectancy has increased significantly. Schooling years have increased, so it's we've been there through seeing these changes. Now, for us, what's important in this relationship is to make sure that there is no significant setback to human development, which can happen during a time of pandemics, of sharp shocks, whether they're economic shocks or climate shocks. So we very much want to stay a strong partner to the government and people of Bhutan, both in the short term, but also for longer term recovery.
And Bhutan has been globally praised by global media for handling COVID-19 crisis. So how would you rate Bhutan's fight against COVID-19, and how does UNDP plan to support Bhutan in its recovery efforts in the long run?
The short answer to that is it has truly been an exemplary COVID-19 response. And I think this comes from His Majesty the King, but also together with the Prime Minister, the government ministers, all of the leaders thinking through what people need first. I think when a country puts the health and safety and dignity of its people at the heart of a response, it wins. And this is not about being rich or poor, east or west. It's such a fundamental truth. And it is born out of evidence. And Bhutan, I think, has shown the world that it is when you do that, when you first say the biggest investment or my biggest rich resource in my country is my people, and I'm going to do whatever I can to protect my people from a virus like this, from any shock that happens this way. That is a lesson that I think Bhutan can show the world. So that to me has been very important. And a second lesson is that you have a group of leaders there who believe in being prepared and having a national response plan well ahead of a disaster, and then the capacity, the vision to be able to implement it right from the beginning. This immediate response, I think, really prevented the spread of the virus among the population. And then you follow that. I mean, in that plan, this is not just an aspirational plan. The testing, the tracing, the distribution of PPEs, the quarantining, all of this happened in a very disciplined, calm way. Now, in most countries, for this to happen, it needs a tremendous trust in government, that the social contract between people and government has to be strong. And maybe that is another key lesson that Bhutan has shown the world, and the Bhutanese people have shown the world, that one must trust in one's leaders to take them through a situation like this. And really, UNDP has been proud to accompany this together with our UN colleagues and the UN resident coordinator in the country, to really be there to support everything we could do in this response.
And the pandemic has affected the tourism sector and construction industries in Bhutan. So as a development expert, what would be your advice on its recovery?
You're right. And, tourism for Bhutan has been, such a mainstay. And it is niche tourism. It is something very special that's also connected to the amazing natural beauty that Bhutan offers to people who can visit. And it will take some time, as we've seen in other countries, particularly in Asia and the Pacific, for a tourism industry to return to the same numbers that it had, because travel is something that people are still somewhat concerned about. But I think the disruption is also an opportunity, and it helps us to rethink travel, construction, industry in general. And for UNDP and its partners, we're exploring this. So exploring experience tourism in Bhutan, bringing that unique culture, the traditions, connecting it with the breathtaking Himalayan range, the environment. So there's a lot of things that one puts down as experiential tourism that can even be improved by showing people coming in that this is also, it's not only looking at beauty, that beauty is there because it is protected. So sometimes pandemics give us a moment to also just pause and to say, what can we do better? And that's not only for tourism, that is for the entire industry, manufacture, for agriculture, to look at some of the gaps and say, now let's put this back, but not where it was before. Let's do even better than we could. And that's something I think we are consistently now unpacking with the different government ministries to support.
Hydropower is one of the sources of income, main sources of income for the government of Bhutan. So as a development expert, what would be your advice amid the climate change threats?
This has been, I think, one of the stories of Bhutan that has always both brought it it brings in significant revenue for Bhutan. It is also, for as long as we can protect our water resources, it is a renewable source of energy. It helps Bhutan be carbon neutral, even carbon negative in its emissions. So there's it's a rich resource to be protected. But it's so important with what's going on with climate change. We see some of our glaciers melting. We see that if we don't protect our watersheds, we cannot continue to rely on this water resource. It could even affect just drinking water supply for people, let alone the energy source that it provides. So protecting glaciers, forests, and water is certainly something that needs a significant reinvestment. We should not take these natural resources for granted, and I don't think we do. In all of my discussions with the government leadership, they're very aware of the need to diversify renewable energy sources and even to reduce the current carbon emission footprint. And greening transport is a critical way to go about this, as is looking at how to protect the watersheds and forest cover. Bhutan still has significant forest cover, and we're looking at with the country, seeing what can be done, what lessons can be learned from other countries that have managed to do this. So you're very right to put this at the center of one of the development debates going on in the country.
Right. And I think Bhutan, we entirely depend on tourism and hydropower for our revenue, national revenue. So, whereas there are other countries who also depend on human resource. So, as an expert, what would be your advice for our policymakers and government to improve human resource in Bhutan?
Well, if there's one thing I would put ahead of the natural resources and the richness in Bhutan, I would put its people. If I recollect the numbers, I think over half the Bhutanese population haven't even celebrated their 30th birthday. So it's a very, very young population, and that's a huge advantage today. So I think and there's a whole generation that would be born and are growing up with this COVID experience. They're in fact even being called Generation C. Now we have to engage them and keep this young population motivated, really finding their sense of purpose as individuals, but as importantly, looking at what they bring for the country. So a number of my discussions with the leadership in Bhutan has been about the future of work, the future of education for young people. And that is so connected with some key things like making sure the digital economy and the knowledge economy flourishes in Bhutan. Now, you can't do that without having invested in high-speed internet access and digital technology for everyone in the country. And that is something I think that will be front and center of what UNDP's Accelerator Lab, which brings in a lot of new ideas, innovation to the country, will be doing. It has to be done together with all of the government and partners. And my hope is that private sector, domestic private sector, but also international private sector, looks at things like this and says, we should be investing even more in this country.
And as you're mentioning about the young population, I think youth unemployment is one of the pressing national issues in Bhutan right now. And I think most of the youth were also engaged in tourism and construction sectors. And because of the COVID-19, there's increasing number of unemployment in the country. So what would be your advice to our government to tackle this challenge of unemployed youths?
I think it's really, as we were discussing, is one of those, one of the toughest challenges that we have. I think the listening to young people as to what their aspirations are is so important, because maybe sometimes all of us all over the world, we think our aspirations are also our children's aspirations. And that's not always the case. I think young generations see themselves maybe in different spaces. And it's about matching what the country needs with the ideas, the plans of young people. But I think there's a lot of potential there. Some of it could be in more traditional sectors. And certainly even in those traditional sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism, there are even new areas there, new skill sets, new kind of niche markets that can be pursued. And then there's a whole new set of jobs that maybe our forefathers weren't involved in. And if I just look at the evidence, and this is where the data is so important, and our work as UNDP and other UN system partners and other colleagues who are working on data, it's so important to look at what that is showing us. Because in some countries, we are already seeing that renewable energy markets open up new jobs. And in fact, they create more new jobs than the old carbon-heavy energy sources. So that's one. The second is the fourth industrial revolution is very much based on new technologies, the digital economy, and new knowledge. And if we can help bring more and more of that to the country, then young people also have opportunities to learn those new capabilities and new skills that can be offered to the world, not just in Bhutan, but Bhutan for the world.
And Bhutan is globally praised for being an environment champion, and Bhutan is also one of the only two countries who is carbon negative. So, however, the irony is that Bhutan is among the countries that's hardest hit by climate change. So how do we change this trajectory, and how can UNDP support Bhutan to remain carbon neutral?
Well, first is what can be done in the country, right? So there's what can be controlled and even raised to another level of ambition in the country. And Bhutan is producing and will present its second nationally determined contribution plan, and leading up to COP26. This will be very, very important to show what Bhutan is doing to protect its forests, to protect the water resources that we were saying are so precious, and even to look at greening industry and agriculture and transport in the countries. Usually manufacturing and transport are two of the heaviest carbon emitters. So really looking at going carbon neutral, even carbon negative, will help the country keep its targets. Now, the thing is, there's so much more that has to be done by the world, even the region that surrounds Bhutan. When we look at the studies now done at all of the NDCs coming in, The level of global ambition, we're not there yet. Even if you count everything that everyone's going to do, all countries in the world are going to do, it amounts to less than 1% reduction of total GHG emissions by 2030. And that is nowhere close to where we need to have it. And we all know this. So it's not only Bhutan, it's every country in the world, particularly the big countries, North and South, that have to raise their level of ambition, their targets, to do much, much more for climate action. And that will also help countries, smaller countries like Bhutan, move forward. Now we have a whole program as UNDP on working with the Green Climate Fund and the government to make sure that we can support particular areas. And the adaptation work going on in agriculture that we're working together is a very good example of this. But also as UNDP, we can do so much more. And that was also part of my conversations with Lin Chen and a number of the ministers that I spoke with.
And as you have completed your virtual mission, a virtual visit to Bhutan, can we expect you to visit Bhutan in person sometime soon?
Of course you can, and you must expect it, because for me it is something I very, very much want to do. And I would like to, and I'm sure my team will help to organize a visit as soon as we see the pandemic recede and then the pandemic restrictions lifted. But it has been such a pleasure and a real privilege. I am so proud of the work that the UN and UNDP does in Bhutan. And I really feel that Bhutan is an example to the world of how to handle both COVID and climate change by putting people first.
Thank you very much for your time and sharing your perspective with us. And hopefully we'll see you in person and have interview in person as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonam. Have a very good evening.
Thank you.